the chairman of the Russian Council of Foreign and Defense Policies about the case for Russia using nuclear weapons, I should say. He had a quote there, the advent of nuclear weapons is a result of the intervention of the Almighty, who appalled that mankind had unleashed 2 world wars within a generation. This is the Russian talking. Costing tens of millions of lives, gave us weapons of Armageddon to show those who had lost their fear of hell that it existed. On that fear rested the relative peace of the last 3/4 of a century. It's a very concerning essay. This is from Sergei Karaganov, honorary chairman of Russia's Council on Foreign and Defense Policy, and it's put out by RT. And it's a perspective that I have seen from Alexander Dugin as well, in many respects. People need to understand that Russia, far more than Europe and far more than the United States, I think, sees this as an existential threat. And they've had their back to the wall many times. This is a very, very dangerous policy that's being pursued by our government. And I don't necessarily mean the Biden administration. He's not running this. This guy can't find his way off the stage. He's a stooge on the stage. The people who are running this country are the military-industrial complex and the CIA. Wake up. Our country, he's writing as a Russian, our country and its leadership seems to me to be facing a difficult choice. It's becoming increasingly clear that our clash with the West will not end even if we achieve a partial, let alone a crushing victory in Ukraine. He said the situation could be worse if we liberate the whole of Ukraine at the cost of monstrous sacrifices and are left with ruins and a population that mostly hates us. It would take more than a decade to quote-unquote re-educate them. That's never going to work. We've done that. Go in and destroy the military in a particular country, then occupy it, and we're going to force democracy and self-government and a love of liberty down their throats, the people who just conquered them. It can't be forced from above. It has to live in the hearts of the people, and which is one of the reasons why I am so pessimistic about America, because the love of liberty no longer lives in our hearts. Who's going to compel us to have to follow the Constitution, to respect individual rights? I mean, just look at what I was talking about in the Congress. These are Republicans. These are Republicans who want a war. These are Republicans who want a civil war. These are Republicans who've lined up behind Donald Trump. And they're just as dangerous as the other side. Every bit as dangerous. It's a very dangerous tribalism that he's inculcating. He's, as much as they hate him, as much as they're doing these dirty things, they love Donald Trump because he gives them exactly what they want. Any of these options, says the Russian, of winning partially or even a total victory, will distract Russia from the much-needed shift of its spiritual, economic, military, and political center. We will be stuck with a wasteful focus on the West. Wasn't that interesting? Because, it is our wasteful focus on war with the Soviet Union. Why? Because the military-industrial complex profits from the Cold War. They profit from the proxy wars. And so they have kept up a situation where we waste our country away while we focus on the wars, the invented wars, to control us, to distract us. Hostility from the West, he said, will continue, and it will support a slow-burning guerrilla civil war. The root cause of, and indeed the main reason for, the Ukrainian crisis, as well as many other conflicts in the world, and the general increase in military threats, he said, is the accelerating failure of Western ruling elites. He's exactly right. It is a collapsing, decadent empire. The U.S. and Europe. And it gets very dangerous when that happens for everybody, inside and out. He said this crisis is accompanied by an unprecedentedly rapid shift in the balance of power in favor of the global majority, driven economically by China, partially by India, with Russia as the military and strategic anchor. This weakening not only infuriates the imperial cosmopolitan elites that Joe Biden and his ilk represent, but listen to this. He said it also frightens the imperial national elites, such as his predecessor, Donald Trump. You see, wow, we got to be number one. Why? We can't, if that is our focus, if safety and security are our focus, we won't get them instead of liberty. And if being number one is our focus, and we will do anything to anyone to be the top dog, guess what? We're already seeing what is happening. We have become a pariah everywhere. We become a pariah with the African nations, as I showed. They say, we don't want the U.S. dollar anymore. We're going to create our own export-import bank. And, of course, the Chinese and the Russians want to be the top dog. They're pushing that, but other countries as well, moving away. This moral, political, economic collapse has been brewing since the mid-1960s. That's right, because I have lived it. I have watched this moral and political collapse of the United States as I have grown old in this country. Interrupted momentarily by the collapse of the USSR, but resumed with renewed vigor in the 2000s, right, with the 9/11 false flag and the authorization for the use of military force that they believe, they tell us, well, it isn't, is a blank check for war anywhere, for any reason or no reason at all. By failing internally, Western elites have actively fed the weeds that have taken root in the soil of 70 years of prosperity, satiation, and peace. These comprise of anti-human ideologies, the denial of family, the denial of homeland, the denial of history, the denial of love between men and women, the denial of faith, the denial of service to higher ideals, the denial of everything that is human. He's spot on. Their philosophy is to weed out those who resist. Their aim is to neuter people in order to reduce their ability to resist modern globalist capitalism, which is becoming more and more obviously unjust and harmful to man and humanity. Globalist capitalism. Meanwhile, he's not talking about free markets, of course. Meanwhile, a weakened U.S. is destroying Western Europe and other countries who are depending on it. That's right. Our sanctions against Russia have hurt the Europeans far worse than it's hurt the Russians. The situation is aggravated by strategic parasitism. In 75 years of relative peace, people have forgotten the horrors of war. They have stopped fearing even nuclear weapons. Everywhere, but especially in the West, the instinct for self-preservation has weakened. I would add they have forgotten God. That's what Alexander Solzhenitsyn said of his own country. That's true of ours now. And he saw it when he fled to the West. He eventually went back to Russia. He said, I can't handle this materialism in the West. You know, it's really a different kind of decadence, and the communists had fallen back a bit, so he went back to Russia. But look, we've forgotten God. We don't fear either God or nuclear war. Stop and think about that. You know, everybody's going around contemplating their navel or whatever, and think that they're going to live forever, think they can do whatever they want, live whatever kind of hedonistic lifestyle. There'll be no consequences for them ever. He said, I've spent many years studying the history of nuclear strategy and have come to an unequivocal, if unscientific, conclusion that the advent of nuclear weapons is a result of the intervention of the Almighty, as I read to you at the beginning, who, appalled that mankind had unleashed 2 world wars within a generation, costing tens of millions of lives, gave us weapons of Armageddon to show those who had lost their fear of hell that it existed. On that fear rested the relative peace of the last 3/4 of a century. Well, I would say no with that. First thing he said I disagree with. No, it is the fear of God that gives us peace. It is the judgment of God that gives us war. The tools don't really make any difference. And there could be worse things than nuclear war. Autonomous killing drones would be one of them. Autonomous robots, killer robots, could be one of them. And as Hugo de Garis had said, once people realize what these global elitists want to do and the technology that they have, he said there will be a war over artificial intelligence and their use of it. That was a separate thing from this whole idea that AI is going to become this godlike superintelligence. No, that was just saying AI is going to be used to further monopolize their control over all of us. And when people see that that's happening, they'll push back. And then these people will use their weapons, and there will be gigadeath, billions of people, not millions of people, dying from this. He says, now the fear is gone. Fear of nuclear war he's talking about, but also fear of God has long since left. The fear of atomic escalation must be restored, otherwise humanity is doomed. No, the fear of God must be restored. Or humanity and our societies are doomed, and we are doomed individually, now and eternally, if we don't fear God. The bomb is not God. I'm not signing up for some kind of nuclear cult here. It's not God, and this is where he's fundamentally wrong. But it's still dangerous, and you need to understand what they're saying and how they feel threatened existentially. These people really are backed in the corner. They understand this is a long, relentless process to wipe them out by NATO. And so the bomb is not God, but they may see that as their only hope, which is what he's saying here. This is what's really concerning. He said what the future world order will look like is being decided in the fields of Ukraine right now. Whether the world that we're used to will be preserved at all, or if it will all be left in radioactive ruins, poisoning the remnants of humanity. And of course, they already promised in Ukraine that they could get into NATO. The leaders could get into NATO. They could become part of the globalist elite, but it would require that they betray and devastate their entire country. Right? And he was fine with that, Arestovich, and talked about it on TV. By breaking the West's will and imposing its aggression, we will not only save ourselves and finally free the world from the Western yoke of 5 centuries, but we will also salvage the whole humanity. This is where it gets really scary. Because he sees this the use of nuclear weapons as a way of saving all of humanity from the existential threat of America and the EU. He said, let us cherish our European heritage, but it is time for us to return home to ourselves. Let us begin to live in our own way. I would say this is true for us in America. It says, let us cherish our American heritage, but let us return to our own homes and to ourselves and to the principles that made that American heritage great. Let us live in our own way. I talked about how secession was not going to work. Nullification is the answer. And you nullify what they do in your own life, even if it means that some of the, luxury goods that you've got are gone. For the future to come to pass, he said, the resistance of the forces of the past, in other words, the West, have to be overcome. If this is not achieved, there will almost certainly be a full-scale world war, which will probably be the last of its kind. So here's his existential setup, pushing for a hopefully limited nuclear exchange, which I don't think is going to be. I don't think there's a hope of that. For this to happen, Western elites need to rediscover their own lost sense of self-preservation by understanding that attempts to wear down Russia by playing the Ukrainians against it are counterproductive for the West itself. The credibility of nuclear deterrence must be restored by lowering the unacceptably high threshold for the use of atomic weapons and by moving cautiously but quickly up the ladder of deterrence escalation. The first steps have already been taken by beginning to deploy nuclear weapons and their delivery vehicles in Belarus, and by increasing the combat effectiveness of the strategic deterrent forces. There are quite a few steps on this ladder. I count about 24, he said. It could even go so far as warning our compatriots and all people of goodwill about the need to leave their homes near the objects of possible nuclear strikes in countries directly supporting the Kiev regime. The enemy must know that we are ready to launch a preemptive retaliatory strike in response to its current and past aggression in order to prevent a slide into a global thermonuclear war. So what he's saying is we may need to tell people who are friendly to Russia, you need to get out of these areas that will be targeted, but we are going to use nuclear weapons. And he thinks, evidently, that they can keep this limited to that. I don't think so. I mean, when you look at World War I, that massive killing field began with the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand or whatever. That's a little spark that kicked it off. Of course, there's many other things that were happening with that. But, you look at how, that is a trigger moment. And these other forces that are already there, just as there's other forces already here with this, there begins a rapid escalation into it. How do you justify what World War I became over these kind of petty issues that in many cases were local disturbances? Well, it was because these powers in Europe wanted a war. They wanted to rearrange the map in their favor. Only if there is a madman in the White House who hates his own country will the U.S. decide to strike in defense of the Europeans and invite retaliation by sacrificing a hypothetical Boston for a notional Poznan. The problem is we are ruled by madmen. And I'm not talking about Biden and Trump. I'm talking about the military-industrial complex and the CIA. Those people are madmen, and they would have absolutely no trouble doing this. As a matter of fact, just take a look at this. You have the Pentagon spokesperson, who is John Kirby. Look at the expression on his face as a reporter is talking to him about the pipeline destruction.
Does it seem believable to you that Russia would destroy a dam and flood ethnic Russian villages and cut off a water supply to Crimea? I mean, that doesn't seem logical. It seems about as logical as blowing up one's own pipeline, doesn't it?
We've come to no conclusions on this. We're working.
Yeah, we come to no conclusions. It's totally clueless as to. Yeah, she's talking about the dam as well as the pipeline there. But let's understand, we were talking about, are we being run by madmen? Well, just listen to this little clip. I'm sure you've heard it. Lindsey Graham talking about, well, Russians are dying. Yeah, that's great.
Free or die.
Now you are free.
Yes.
And we will be.
And the Russians are dying.
It's the best money we've ever spent.
Thank you so much.
No, it's...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the people will push back and say, well, there was a clip there. He didn't say, the Russians are dying, it's the best money we've ever spent. There were some things that were said in between there. That doesn't change it. That's what he means. We're spending money to kill Russians. That's the purpose. As a matter of fact, as they pushed back on that clip and said, well, that was edited. He said, yeah, we're killing Russians. That's good. Russians are dying. That's good. Yeah, I love that. And he said a couple of other things. Then he says, best money we ever spent. Is it? Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov told Foreign Policy magazine, Foreign Policy, this is Council on Foreign Relations, other things like that, in a newly published interview, that he was told by Kiev's NATO backers to, quote, kill as many Russians as possible, unquote, even if Ukraine doesn't get all the weapons that it wants. We asked, can we have stingers? He said in the interview published on Tuesday. We were told no, dig trenches and kill as many Russians as you can before it's over. He said people thought our victory was impossible. But now he says now that we've been given Bradleys and Strykers and Abrams and Leopards and more, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. We'll soon be equipped with American-made F-16 fighter jets. We keep this thing going on, right? We can kill more Russians. Spend more money wisely, according to Lindsey Graham. Well, you've seen the pictures, I'm sure, on social media of the aerial shots of all of these lions and tigers and bears and leopards being blown up by drones. The kill as many Russians as possible line sounds very consistent with what he's controversially boasted about in last month in Kiev. The Russians are dying. It's the best money we've ever spent. He says this over and over again. the common man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. thedavidknightshow.com.